Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Admiral, let me start with you. As you know, we are the proud home in Missouri of Whiteman Air Force Base and the B-2 bomber. Let me ask you about the Air Force's budget request and the funding cuts for the B-2 defense management system. Does that decision cause you any concern about the B-2's ability to operate in high-end threat environments to the end of its service life?
Senator, I think that is a great example of some of the difficult decisions that we're going to have to make and trading or balancing near-term risk for long-term risk. And so overall, the Air Force is way ahead on the bomber program, bomber roadmap, I think it's referred to. I endorse. I think that is a very thoughtful approach. In the loss of the defensive management system, we will accommodate that risk for the greater gain the Air Force is going to provide overall.
That sounds like a yes to me. You think that there is a risk that it will there will be some detriment to its ability to operate in high-end capacity.
There is, but I can manage it.
What else do we need to ensure that the B-2 maintains its ability to operate in those environments if this decision goes forward?
That is part of the planning that I have to do, so we will use operational mechanisms to compensate for technological abilities of the aircraft. I retain full confidence that the B-2 can do the missions that I'll ask it to do.
Great. Well, I'll be following up with you on that. General, let me turn to you for a second. Russian bombers make regular visits to our coastlines, we know. What role would you say that the F-15EX could play in protecting our homeland against these and other threats in the decades that are coming?
Yeah, one of the things that we do see is it's not only the increasing frequency, but also the complexity of how they're maneuvering and the missions that they're flying. Some of it has to do with where we would need to go to intercept them based on the length of their missiles that they carry, the range that the missiles now have. For example, the AS-23 is an example of a long-range missile. What that means is we want to intercept them further out, right? We want to go further so that we can not only get the missiles, we want to hit the bombers, right? So that they never actually get to launch them. And so the F-15EX brings us that. It brings us that extended range that we can get with the F-15X. As well as a much significant improvement in the number of missiles it can carry. So we see that from a homeland defense aspect. We see that new platform as being well suited for the homeland defense role in both our counter cruise missile defense, our counter airborne threats such as the Russian bombers.
Great. That's great to hear. Admiral, let me come back to you. Let's talk a little bit about nuclear policy. Are you confident that Beijing would stick to its announced no first use policy if there were a conflict with the United States?
Senator, I think I could drive a truck through that no first use policy.
Mm-hmm. And why do you say that? I mean, why is that the case?
In other words, and I'm not trying to be flippant on a very serious matter, right? The number of situations where they may conclude that first use has occurred, right, that don't meet our definition of first use, and I should back up. They are very opaque about what their intentions are. They're very different from the Russians. We have very little to go on in terms of how they interpret that relative to what we see from the other competitor. So what constitutes first use? Where might they say we're actually not that's our territory, right? Therefore, it doesn't count as an attack against you. And more broadly, right, I mean, Soviet Union had a no first use policy. I don't think we took great comfort in that either. And so the declaratory policy things, not helpful in my mission area to deter.
That's very helpful, and I think is a great point for those who would advocate a no first use policy on our end as to why that would be, I think, a very serious strategic mistake. Let me give you, Admiral, still on the same subject, an opportunity to clarify something. A senior U.S. official recently was reported as saying, and I'm quoting now, the sole reason the United States has nuclear weapons is to prevent others from using nuclear weapons. That doesn't seem to be exactly what our declaratory policy is. Can you clarify what our declaratory policy is?
So the Nuclear Posture Review lays it out very clearly in terms of our strategic capabilities are designed to deter a strategic attack on the United States, which can be nuclear, but I think it wisely acknowledged the fact that it now may be possible to have a strategic attack against our vital interests that is non-nuclear, particularly in space and cyber.
Right. So we will only consider the employment of nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances to defend our vital interests or those of our allies or partners. And those circumstances could include, as you just said, significant non-nuclear strategic attacks. Is that correct? Am I getting that correct? Great. Admiral, I've got another question for you about the W-76 TAC-2. I'll submit that for the record because I'm about out of time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.